Hello folks, my name is Mark. This is Why I Hate the World. How you guys doing? So what is going on in Texas? I'm sure you've heard about this. It's kind of an humanitarian crisis is starting to form in Texas. And it's because the entire state is basically frozen solid right now. There's massive snowstorms which has paralyzed Texas and caused power outages around the entire state, and millions of people for several days now have gone without electricity, without heat, in sub-zero temperatures, without clean drinking water, that kind of thing. And the thing about Texas is that they're very proud to be independent in Texas. They were Texas history is a very, people are very proud of the fact that, Texas was its own country before it decided to join the United States. And they didn't join until like later in the country's history. It was like the 1880s, I think, when Texas joined the Union. And, there's a lot of that sort of stalwart kind of bootstrappy, pull yourself up by your long johns kind of thing. A man is an island and you have to go out and have responsibility for yourself and all of that stuff, protect yourself and your family, and I don't want no government interfering with my in my business, that kind of thing. And I think this crisis is kind of showing how that attitude is just complete and total bullshit. So what the hell is going on in Texas, right? Well, basically it just got too cold. They had these massive ice storms which froze everything solid, and that caused the power grid to fail, right? So the Texas power grid is actually separate from the rest of the United States. Well, most of it. Most of Texas is covered by it. It's called the ERCOT, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, which was founded in the early 1930s. And they made it independent on purpose because they didn't want to be subject to federal regulations at the time. I haven't really been able to find out what those regulations are, but I know one of them has to do with the amount of power that you have to have in reserve at any given time in order to swap out with other people on the grid. So there's the one grid that takes care of the western half of the United States and one part that takes care of the eastern half, and then Texas is its own thing, and power gets swapped in between all three of them, right? And apparently Texas, it's independently owned and privatized, essentially, and they don't have the same type of regulations that the other, government grids do, right? And that's how they wanted it. And the problem with that, when you don't have any regulation, is that then nobody can, enforce rules. So what happened, right? Well, they knew that this was a problem, right? Because apparently the power in Texas is mainly supplied by wind, and then also natural gas, and then there's some coal-fired plants, right? And what it is that they didn't insulate, right, the natural gas pipelines, apparently, and they all froze. Right. And then also during the cold, that also messes up wind turbines, although not to the extent that we've been told. And, so that caused lots of power generators, to start dropping off the grid. And apparently it got really bad to the point where, because what happens is that when people go home, they turn on the lights, they turn on, especially when it's cold, they turn on their heaters, things like that. That causes more stress on the grid, more demand. And as less power is going into the grid and more people want it, that causes things like energy transformers to overload, and fires to break out and shit starts exploding, power lines start going down. And apparently they were within minutes of that happening across the entire grid there, ERCOT grid. And if that would have happened, then all of these people in Texas would be without power for months on end, right? Essentially, the same kind of thing happened in Puerto Rico when the hurricane hit. The grid, things start blowing up, and people there didn't have power for like a year. The same shit almost happened in Texas, and they had to shut it all down in order to prevent that from happening. Well, now millions of people don't have any electricity. People are starting to freeze to death. Apparently 16 people, as far as I can tell, have already died, although I saw another source that said 34. So, that number may go up in the next couple of days. And, people are getting desperate, man. They don't have any clean water. They're being told to boil their water, but they don't have any electricity, so they can't boil their water. You know, people are starting to freeze. People are resorting to stuff like they're taking, they're chopping down trees, right? Burning wood. They're taking rocks and heating up rocks, and then you drop that into a pan full of water, and then you get under your table and you put a blanket over your table and you chill under there as the steam comes out. Kind of like shit that people would do in the Neolithic. Right? Like, that's what they're doing now. Neolithic survival times in fucking Texas, right? And, it's getting real bad there. And this is the thing about it. It's like, well, what are the politicians in Texas doing to, like, stop this? Are they trying to help people? Well, not really. Ted Cruz, for example, the, Republican senator from Texas, got caught fleeing to the Cancun in Mexico. He went to go chill on a nice warm beach with his family and stuff while his constituents are sitting there dying, freezing to death. That's fucking bullshit. I mean, here's the thing, right? What could Ted Cruz do about it? Well, he could do something. He's a senator. He has pull in Washington. He could be organizing FEMA to go out there and rescue fucking people. You know what I mean? He could be making phone calls. He could be like, coordinating some effort to get help out to people. He didn't fucking do shit. He hopped on a plane to go chill in the lap of luxury for 5 days, while the people that depend on his ass freeze to death. So there you go. That's exactly like, you're not going to get any help from like the government in Texas. So it's kind of a fucked up situation, and it kind of shows that, that sort of stalwarty, bootstrappy kind of libertarian, I can take care of myself kind of shit is just complete bullshit, because the other states around Texas, they may be having problems, but people aren't starving to death. Right? In the other states around Texas, people aren't starving to death in, Oklahoma or Wyoming or Colorado or Nebraska or any of those other states that are also being like slammed with giant, freezing storms right now. And it's like, kind of goes to show you that this is what government regulations are good for. Okay? Because if you don't, that's the thing about private industry. Like, all the Republicans and the conservatives and all of the free market people, they love private industry. They want to give them tax breaks every 5 seconds, right? And the thing about it is that if you don't have any regulations to police the private industry, then you're not going to get what you want. The reason why that they didn't insulate their pipelines, their natural gas pipelines, is because it costs money. They knew it was a problem. They knew that one day there could be a snowstorm like this. There could be a weather event which could screw that up, and it was just a disaster waiting to happen. But they didn't do anything about it because they didn't want to spend the money. That's the thing. That's the problem with, corporations in private industries. They won't do the right thing unless we force them to. Well, the only way that you can force them to do that is through regulations, right? You can't boycott the power industry. What are you going to do? Like, what are you just going to like take your house off the grid, get like your own fucking private power plant? That's not going to fucking work, right? You can't like, utilities. That's a perfect example of something that everybody has to depend on someone else for. If you live in an apartment building in a city, you can't go sink your own well and have your own water supply, right? You could put up some solar panels and shit, but that's not going to work to supply all of your power needs. Maybe it'll do enough, but here's the thing about it. If everybody did that, if everybody put solar panels up, maybe we could. So this is a perfect example of how all men are not an island, how this sort of libertarian, I can take care of myself shit. I don't need any help. I don't need cooperation from, a large group of people like a government. This kind of demonstrates how all of that stuff just, fails when it comes to the practical application of, policy that affects real people's lives. That shit fails every single time. So I hope people in Texas learn this lesson, and I hope, when it comes time to vote, they remember what Ted Cruz did, and they remember that how private industry failed them, and they decide to take some fucking power back and clean their shit up in Texas, because it's not like this is going to be the only time there's going to be a natural disaster. A couple of years ago, I remember seeing pictures and memes and stuff that it was so hot in Texas that the streets were melting and like railway lines were bending and squirrels and shit were dying of heat stroke. I remember seeing that, and it's like, this is all part of a pattern here. You know, one year it's extremely hot, another year there's wildfires, and the next year it's extremely cold. This is, you know, these extreme weather events go hand in hand with global climate change, and it's not going to be the last time. It'll happen again. And if, you know, if we don't do something about it, you know, the least we can do is prepare. Right? If we're not going to do anything to try to save the environment, if we're not going to take the basic fucking steps in order to reduce carbon emissions and try to curb global climate change, the next best thing we can do is try to prepare ourselves for it. So when the shit actually hits the fan, we don't have millions of people without electricity and freezing to death in their homes. Anyway, that's all I got, folks. Adios.